41 years ago, in 1945, the Second World War came to an end. But not as many had once imagined, not with the fall of tyranny, but with the triumph of the Axis powers. In Europe, Germany cemented its dominance, transforming the continent under the banner of the Reich. In the East, the Empire of Japan emerged ascendant, establishing the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a vast and far-reaching sphere of influence spanning the Pacific and beyond. Within this new order, no region played a more pivotal role than the lands of China. From the industrial might of Manchuria to the political heart of the Nanjing Special Administrative Government. From the prosperous puppet state of the Guangdong National Republic to the agricultural backbone of Taiwan, these territories formed the cornerstone of Japan's vision for Asia. In this rare and long-suppressed footage from the archives, the leaders of the Axis powers are seen meeting in Berlin, 1945. Our moment never broadcast, never officially acknowledged. Behind closed doors, away from the public eye, agreements were forged, territories divided, and the fates of entire nations quietly sealed. No applause, no cameras, only silence, and history rewritten in whispers. There was no need for speeches. The message had already been delivered across battlefields, across nations, across time. Now, the streets answered back not with rebellion, but with celebration. Flags hung from every window, hands raised in unison. And as the motorcade passed through the heart of the Reich, history did not look away. It watched, and it remembered. In the East, there were no ruins to rebuild, only a vision to realize. Across the islands, celebrations echoed not with chaos, but with choreography. Students saluted. Banners rose. Victory had come not through destruction, but through design. A society arranged like a calendar, precise, proud, predictable. And at its center, the flag of the rising sun, not just waving in the wind, but written into the future. As the first light of dawn stretches over the eastern horizon, a new era begins, not in triumph, but in reconstruction. Far from the icy plains, the cities of China began to stir. But they did not awaken to freedom, they awoke to function. Under the banners of reconstruction, the streets were repaved, the voices rehearsed, and the silence institutionalized. Factories emerged where fields once stood. The empire reimagined China not as a people, but as a machine, efficient, silent, and expendable. By the end of the 1950s, the streets no longer screamed, nor did they whisper. They simply moved. Order had arrived not just in the factories or the schools, but in the rhythm of every footstep, in the silence between broadcasts. By 1960, the names remained the same. The flags flew higher. The maps looked unchanged. But the meaning of each place had shifted. Manchuria was no longer simply a puppet, it had become a fortress. Nanjing no longer administered. It watched, documented, controlled. Taiwan's fields no longer just fed, they became model farms for an entire region. And Guangdong was no longer waiting for instruction. It was moving ahead on its own. In the north, there were no grand declarations, no thunderous cheers, only the steady rhythm of needles, stitching a new identity into old cloth. In Manchuria, the flag was not raised, it was sewn. Thread by thread, allegiance was embedded not in the heart, but on the chest. Born to rule, and raised to be ruled, His Majesty Puyi was never truly free. Restored to the throne of Manchuria in 1946, he returned not as a sovereign, but as a symbol, a monarch in ritual, not in power. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he appeared in parades, on postage stamps, and in carefully staged ceremonies. He smiled, he nodded, and he endured. He spent his final years in quiet dignity, residing in a state-appointed manor in Changchun. When he passed in 1979, the government declared a day of mourning. To the public, he was the last emperor. To the regime, he was the first citizen of order. By the 1960s, Manchuria was no longer just a buffer state, it was the engine of the East. Steel, coal, arms, and men assembled with discipline, delivered with pride. New cities rose along the southern rail. Their names were unfamiliar, but their purpose was not. In workshops and parade grounds, the sound was the same: marching, hammering, building order. Here, uniformity was not a limit. It was the design. Morning broadcasts, standard uniforms, recitations of loyalty. From schoolyards to streets, movement followed rhythm, not will. In Manchuria, individuality was not suppressed, it was never introduced. In Nanjing, the flag still flew high, proud, and perfectly choreographed. Here, governance was performed, not pursued. Cabinets met, laws were passed, speeches were made, and every document eventually arrived in Tokyo. And as the flag danced above, the stage below was set. Footsteps echoed through marble courtyards, rehearsed, relentless, and entirely symbolic. In the chamber of decisions, there were no dissents, no objections, only applause, measured, timely, and rehearsed. Every motion passed, every resolution supported, not because they were perfect, but because they were predictable. 3 words, repeated across the region: peace, autonomy, harmony. Few questioned what they truly meant. Across the strait from the continent's fractured ambitions, Taiwan remained still. Its fields stretched wide, its skies stayed quiet, and its pace unchanged. The village was the nation, the harvest its currency. There were no parades here, no flags waving on rooftops. Only schedules, grain quotas, and announcements through loudspeakers. To its people, politics was a rumor. Progress, a poster. Orders came from voices no one had seen. There was peace. There was rice. There was little else. Yet in the silence, the island endured, still beneath the same sun, still within the same empire, still waiting to be noticed. Among the regions under the empire's watch, Guangdong moved first, not with speeches, but with streets. Concrete replaced dust. Rail lines returned cargo. Signs spoke in multiple scripts. Tokyo called it progress. Others called it favoritism. In Guangdong, development was not debated, it was deployed.
观众朋友晚安，这里是东亚放送南京总台。北夜南京市中心区域出现不明群体集结，部分街道短暂交通受阻，当地治安部门与协政警备单位已迅速介入，情势目前已完全受控。据初步了解，有小部分人士涉嫌违规散播非法刊物及鼓动群众，事件正在进一步调查当中。本台将持续关注后续发展，请市民配合当局维持秩序，避免不必要之传言与恐慌。
In the summer of 1975, unrest broke out in Nanjing. Thousands took to the streets, some shouting, some burning, some simply standing. The response was swift. Armed forces and corporation security units were deployed to clear the area. Order returned to the screen. But it came with footsteps, with gas, and with batons. They called it dispersal. No one could name what was truly removed. The flags stayed on government buildings, but in people's homes it was logos that flew highest. Panasonic on the radio, Sapporo in the fridge, Shiseido on the mirror. The empire did not march anymore. It sold. The people still spoke Chinese, but now they had to speak something else as well. In schools, in broadcasts, in legal documents, language did not disappear. It was doubled. Steel was their pride. Smoke filled the north. Engines sang louder than people. The emperor blessed every engine and ruled from the margins of the machine. In factories, no speeches were needed, only production quotas. Every street had rules. Every rule had forms. The city lived in paperwork and checkpoints. Order was not about safety. It was about knowing your place and staying there. No riots. No soldiers, no future. Children learned songs from across the sea. Parents listened to winds carrying no news. The island waited. Nothing came. While the rest of China struggled for breath, the South inhaled profits. Japanese corporations poured in bank towers, shopping districts, electronic empires. Neon lights didn't just sell products. They sold futures. In Guangdong, freedom was measured in credit, and success was branded with kanji. Behind the neon, factories rose like temples. Sony, Toshiba, Hitachi, names that once meant dreams. In Guangdong, they became assembly lines. Circuits, plastics, microchips flowing faster than any river. Here, prosperity wasn't just displayed. It was built one component at a time.
Sony introduces the only cassette player as small as a cassette case. An incredible sounding Super Walkman.
早晨，呢度係廣東電視台。本台收到最新消息，廣東國經濟表現持續強勁，股市指數今朝再創歷史新高。日資電子科技企業領漲，帶動整體市場活力空前。官方發表聲明，指自由經濟區政策成果顯著，未來將擴大金融自由化範圍，朝向打造亞洲新興金融中心邁進。
The numbers rose, the crowds cheered, but beneath every upward line there was no story, only transactions. No dream was shared, only trades made and forgotten. Not all of China fell to the empire. Beyond the zones of control, fragments remained unconquered, uncelebrated. To the west, Xinjiang, a vast arid land now flying the crescent and star. Its government was forged with foreign hands, but its voice spoke of something older, resistance. Beyond that, the roof of the world, Tibet remained apart, silent, weathered and alone. Its people followed no slogans, only prayer. And across what was once the center lay the last breath of a republic. A government without power, a people without unity but still calling themselves China. Xinjiang, to some, a land of deserts and defiance. But here beneath the open sky, it begins with horses, not borders, not weapons, just riders herding across a land older than any flag. Tibet begins not with movement, but with a sounder bell, struck by a monk, echoing into a sky older than nations. Inside the monastery, the lamps flicker, the chants return, but time does not move. It turns star. There are no commands here, no revolutions, only prayer, and the silence that never left. In the heart of the mainland, a republic endured not by unity, but by habit. It had laws, but no force. Parliaments that passed motions no one followed. Leaders who spoke, but changed nothing. They still called it China, and no one argued. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no new era declared, and yet the new order began. Cameras replaced soldiers, schedules replaced orders, and the people, they stopped asking. In classrooms, children recite 2 languages, one for the future and one for the past. Only one is tested. The flags still fly, but no one looks up. Television replaced belief. Advertisements replaced memory. Culture became export, and identity became optional. They say history is written by the victors, but here history was reprinted, redubbed, and broadcast at 7 p.m. There are no protests now, no fire, no slogans, only screens, only metrics, only results. And as the decades passed, the cities rose, the stories faded, and the empire no longer needed to speak, because no one asked. This is peace, this is order, this is China.